Good evening, everybody. Welcome. If you can find your seats, make sure you sign in. We are going to get started. If you would please rise for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So again, thank you for being here. We will turn it over to Dr. Scanlon and Mr. Carlson.
There are two handouts. One is the agenda, and the other, I'm going to go over our employee benefits tonight.
You'll pick up most of your voice.
My wife says, "Why do you have to talk so loud all the time?" Well, here's why. So when I go home and I start talking loud. So our health insurance is increasing next year 12.7% over what it is right now, which is what we had this year. So that's a very unusually high increase, and it's really a matter of increasing medical costs, especially on the pharmaceutical side. You know, there's a reason why every other commercial you see on TV is for a pharmaceutical company, because people see the commercial and say, I need me some of that. And they go to their doctor and said, I need a prescription for whatever. And okay, here you go. And it costs a lot of money. So it's not that our insurance is very expensive compared to other plans. Just medical costs are skyrocketing now. The other, we belong to a self-insured consortium with two other school districts. Our rates are actually still a little, even with our increase, would be a little bit below what most school districts on Long Island have, which is NYSHIP, the New York State Health Insurance Plan, otherwise known as Empire Plan. Those rates are actually, even with our increase, a little higher. Their rates, they saw the huge increase last year. There is one other plan that some of the East End school districts have. It's called the East End Health Plan. East End Schools Health Plan, the East End Health Plan. Those rates are much higher. So there's really not, it's not even a matter of, well, let's see if we can find something else. So all of our employees contribute towards health insurance. The percent towards the total varies based on the individual unit and their bargaining, collective bargaining contract. And the rates vary between 14% and 18%. For instance, our teachers and administrators all pay currently 18% towards the cost. And our retirees still have coverage, and the rate that they pay, the retiree pays, is what they were paying when they retired. When a retiree is Medicare eligible, Medicare becomes primary coverage. So even though they would still have coverage through the district, through our plan, the rate drops down because Medicare is primary. So the rate that we pay is much less for retirees on Medicare. So in actual dollars, the increase to next year is a little over $5 million. And that's based on, when we put the budget, first put the budget together, it's all based on current staffing, everybody we have right now. And then what ultimately winds up in the budget next year will be dependent on any changes to staffing that are made. Also included in the area of employee benefits, Social Security, which is 7.65% of payroll. For 2025, that's up to 170, meaning salary of up to $176,100. Any salary beyond that, we pay the 1.45%, which is the Medicare piece. The increase to next year, again, based on current staffing, and it has to do with increasing salaries based on the bargaining unit contracts, would be approximately $350,000. Other benefits include workers' compensation, life insurance, unemployment insurance, disability, and dental. They're all pretty much staying the same about next year. Increase combined total of all of those, a little over $38,000, again, based on current staffing. Retirement systems. So all of our full-time employees belong to one of two retirement systems, either the teacher's retirement system or the employee's retirement system. Part-time employees can join, but they're not mandated to. The mandate is not a district mandate, it's a New York State mandate. And the district pays in a percentage of salaries to the retirement systems each year. The rate varies from year to year, and it's a little different the way TRS does it and ERS does it. Teachers' retirement system, there's one, if you don't know, both of the retirements, the state retirement systems have 6 tiers. And it goes by when somebody joined. So, for instance, prior to 1971, there was just the retirement system. And then in 1971, the state legislature decided, okay, well, we need to reel back in the benefits a little bit on the retirement system, but there's in the state constitution where they cannot change the existing members of the retirement system can't change their benefits. So what they do is they called what was in place already Tier 1, and then they created Tier 2. Said, okay, everybody that's Tier 1 continues the way it was. Tier 2, benefits got reduced a little bit. And then in 1976, Tier 3 was created, 1983, Tier 4 was created, and then everybody was Tier 4. All new employees from 1983 all the way up to 2010 when Tier 5 was created. And then almost immediately in 2012, Tier 6 was created. So that's where we're up to now is Tier 6. And so for the teachers' retirement system, they just do one rate. Doesn't matter what tier anyone's in. We have our anybody belonging to teachers' retirement system, their salaries, percentage, that's it. Right now, this current year, it's at 10.11%, and the estimate that the teachers' retirement system put out for next year's salaries is between 9.5% and 10%. So typically, we would use something right around the middle of that range, of about 9.75%. So the good news on that is the rate is decreasing slightly. If our staffing stayed right where it was, it would wind up with still a larger contribution by the district because of increasing salaries. But again, we do all this based on current staffing. So I'll give you an example. If let's say somebody's retiring, we're not replacing that position. So what we do is we save, in the budget codes, we would say, okay, well, we'll reduce the salary by such and such. We'll reduce the Social Security by the 7.65% of that. We'll reduce health insurance. Now, if that person is off, that person might still be on health insurance as a retiree, but we're not adding a new person. So we don't need to add anyone on for health insurance for that. And on the retirement system, we would reduce that a little bit. If we're accessing positions where somebody is losing their job, then they might go on unemployment insurance. So in which case, we would have to add a little bit to unemployment when we do that, any of the staffing changes. So back to the teachers' retirement system, it's a one rate for everybody. Employees' retirement system, which is everyone other than our instructional staff. So by the way, the teachers' retirement system, that's our teachers, administrators, and teaching assistants. All other employees of ours are in employee retirement system. Again, full-time employees must join. Part-time employees are, it's up to them whether they want to join or not. ERS does the rates a little bit differently. Each of the tiers pays a different rate. And as you could probably guess, the lower the tier number, meaning like Tier 1, which has the richest benefits, the contribution rate by the employer would be the highest, and so on. Tier 6 would have the lowest. I'm not even counting Tier 1 and 2. We don't have any Tier 1 employees left. We have a couple of Tier 2s, so I'm not even counting those because it's such an insignificant number in the grand total. So tiers 3 through 6, actually 4 through 6 is where almost all our employees are. The rates for the current year vary between 11.4% and 17.9%. Next year, they're going up to the same range, at 12.9% to 19.6%. Right now, on next year, the aggregate average would be about, based on the salaries within each tier, about 16%. So when you add the two together, TRS and ERS, in actual dollars in next year's budget, is an increase of about $578,000, and again, that's based on current staffing. So if you add it all together, you can see the increase, dollar-to-dollar increase, to next year is just over $6 million. And to put it in perspective, our 2%, by the way, the comptroller came out and said the tax, what they call the maximum allowable levy as far as the percentage for next year's tax cap is 2%. So that 2% on the tax levy is about $3.5 million. So before we've done anything else, and we'll talk about state aid in a couple of minutes, there's already more in benefit costs than our tax levy would support. When we get to tax cap, which will be probably next meeting, our tax cap next year will be higher than 2%, but that has to do with building aid and debt service payments. So I'll cover that in more detail at our next meeting. That's it. I'll sit down now if anyone has any questions about.
I got one for you. Just to clarify, there is a separate reserve for the unemployment, right?
That is correct. We have a workers' compensation reserve and we have an unemployment insurance reserve. We're self-insured for both workers' compensation and for unemployment. So we have money in reserve for both of those. We try to each year put what the annual expenses would be. I mean, of course, there's no way to know. Like workers' comp, we don't know exactly how much it's going to be in workers' compensation claims next year. So we put in an amount in the budget, and hopefully that's enough to support all the claims that are incurred during the year. If not, we have to dip into the reserves. Maybe this is where your question is leading. So if we needed to, we could lower those lines some by using some of the reserves if necessary in those areas. That would help us out a little budgetarily.
So how are those reserves now, and is there a standard amount that you're recommended to have based on the number of employees and or open cases? I'm not sure.
So there's not a specific amount that's either required or recommended, but we would have to justify how much we have. So there's not a minimum, there's no minimum required. As far as a maximum, we would have, so let's say, for instance, we have typically $20,000 a year in unemployment insurance claims. If we had $4 million in unemployment insurance reserve, our auditors and the state comptroller would say, no. There's no reason you should have that much in a reserve, $4 million in reserve for something that's typically $20,000 a year. So we would just have to be able to justify that. So we have it's about $150,000 in that reserve. And we don't spend a lot in unemployment insurance each year. There have been years in the past where we've had large numbers of teachers being accessed. For example, in 2012, we had to access a lot of positions, not just teachers, all sorts of employees, because we had that was the first year of the tax cap, by the way. And we had what was called the gap elimination adjustment. For those of you who were around at the time, you heard all about that for a number of years. That came out of the 2008 economic disaster that took place. So what the state did is they reduced, not just us, school districts all around the state, reduced our state, said, here's what you should get in state aid. However, we're not going to give you that much. We're going to put in a negative number to lower that, and they called that number the gap elimination adjustment. So ours, at its peak, was about $6 million. Actually, it was more than $6 million per year reduced from our state aid for a number of years. It came out to, if you added all the years together, it was somewhere around $36 million that we lost in state aid because of that gap elimination adjustment. So during that time, though, and with the tax cap, there was nothing we could do. We didn't have the money coming in state aid. We were our aid was reduced by $6 million. We couldn't, in fact, that year, 2012, that was first year, as I said, first year of the tax cap, our first budget was above the tax cap. And it did not get the required 60%. So we had to make a lot of cuts that year. So that year, because there were so many reductions in staff, all around 100 something, I don't remember the exact amount, yeah. So a lot of people, a lot of them got jobs somewhere else, but a lot of them collected unemployment insurance. So our unemployment insurance that year spiked. So something like that. If we were going to have a lot of potential reduction in positions, we would, as I was saying, when we would make those adjustments to the budget, like, okay, we're eliminating positions, we're going to cut salaries this much, Social Security this much, retirement system that much, health insurance this much, but we would add to unemployment. Now, to go to workers' compensation, those numbers it can be as low as, $300,000-$400,000 in expenses in a year. It can be over $1 million. We do have excess insurance, so if an individual claim were to be very high, and the deductible is about $600,000, over that we have insurance that would pick up from that point. But virtually every school district in New York is self-insured for unemployment and workers' comp for two reasons. One, we can, businesses can't, we can. And two, the reason we do is because it saves money. Anyone that owns a business and has to pay it to the state insurance fund for workers' compensation or unemployment, you would know that whatever you're paying in, if your employee claims were to be more than that, they'll charge you for the difference. So you're absolutely paying whatever your employees would collect in either of those, and then some. We only pay what our employees would collect. So.
And what about disability?
Disability is very little. It's only in one, let me see what the amount, it's very small, and it's one or two of our smaller units have something in their contract about disability. I don't remember the, by the way, so anyone who owns a business, as an employer, you have to have disability insurance for your employees. We don't. And the only ones we do have it for are if it's in their contract. So last year, the last fiscal year, we spent total of $28,547 on disability insurance. So it's a couple of our units have a clause in their contract that we have a disability policy for them, but we're not required to have disability insurance. Yes, sir.
Couple of things. First, I just want to verify, you mentioned that the amount that the district pays is actually a percentage of salaries as opposed to a fixed amount based on whether it's an individual or a family plan coverage?
You're talking health insurance?
Mhm.
No. So the percentage of salaries is for retirement systems.
Okay.
So for health insurance, there are actually 5 rates that are charged. For our active employees, it's actually one of 2 rates: individual coverage or family coverage. So it is based. It's not based on their salary. It's based on whether they have individual coverage or family coverage. What's based on what unit they're in is what percentage of the cost of insurance the employee pays. So, as I said, for example, our teachers and administrators pay 18% of the cost for insurance. Whether you have individual coverage or you have family coverage, they pay 18%, the district pays the other 82%. For our retirees, there are actually 3 rates. One is if it's an individual retiree, and the rates have, not all of our retirees, let me take that back. For our retirees who are eligible for Medicare, there are 3 rates. One is individual coverage, and they're covered by Medicare. It's a much reduced rate because Medicare is primary. And then the other two rates are for family coverage for the retiree. One is if one of the spouses is covered by Medicare, that's a lower rate than the normal family rate. And then if both spouses are covered by Medicare, then it's an even lower rate because now Medicare is primary for both of them. So the cost to our health insurance is not based on their salaries. It's what individual or family coverage they have.
Okay. So based on that, what you're mentioning here is that the employee contribution is what you're listing here. The employee contribution off that premium is what you're listing here as a percentage.
No, what I'm listing here is the cost to the district.
You have a line on the slide that says employees contribute between 14 and 18%
Right,
of the premium.
of the premium.
Okay.
Of the premium.
So that's where my question is going
So
to
what I
be.
put in the budget, just the dollar amount, when you go to the last page, and it says for 24-25, for instance, 33,856,000, that's the district share. That does not include, that's not 100% of the premium, that's the district share after the employees paid their share.
Okay. I'm going to ask this question with the deepest of regrets, but is this number customary and usual? Because I'm not going to ask if it's reasonable, but, I think all of us here pay insurance, healthcare insurance in various
Right.
levels and numbers based on our needs. And I don't have a benchmark for schools. So I just have to ask the question, is that, as you compare across school districts in this region, because the cost of living is what it is, the cost of medical care is what it is that number generally considered reasonable? Not reasonable, but customary?
No, I got you. And that's the same question our Board of Education asks anytime we go into one of these contracts. They're pretty much around all in the same ballpark. It's not the highest contribution for employees on Long Island, but it's by no means the lowest either. It varies. It's not crazy out of whack with anyone else. So one thing that our Board of Education has been doing over the last, I would say, 10 years is each contract wanting that percentage to increase somewhat, at least, something, going that direction. It used to be, up until, I would say, I think it was late 90s, our employees, along with most school districts, didn't contribute anything towards health insurance. Because back then, health insurance just didn't cost very much, right? 30 years ago, it just didn't cost a lot. And because medical costs weren't, even all relatively speaking, it just wasn't that big a deal 30 years ago. Over the years, people live longer, and then the costs escalate, and then they have more ways to keep people alive even longer. It all snowballs. I guess in a good way, but it's keeping us all alive. But like I was talking about the pharmaceutical commercials, the pharmaceutical costs are skyrocketing unbelievably, not just for us, for everybody. But anyway, to go back to your question, we're kind of in the ballpark pretty much with most other districts, unit by unit. Like what we'll do is we'll take our teachers and compare it to other teachers. We'll take our clerical unit and compare to clericals in other districts. We'll take our maintenance and operations unit and compare them to other districts.
And since many of those districts negotiate separate from us, there's different things. One of the area districts around us, their retirees pay 40% in retirement. Another district last year offered a retirement incentive that if people retired, they got free health care in retirement, which in this day and age, can be critical of them, that maybe from their finances works for them, but that would be a massive amount of money because people are living longer. And the laughable thing is, here's where the history teacher comes out again. The reason why Social Security was set at 65 for retirement back in the 1930s when it was created, because that's when the life expectancy was. They thought you were going to die. It wasn't created at 65, going, oh, they'll live 20 more years and they'll collect this. That's when the life expectancy was 65 in the 1930s. So they figured you're going to retire, and in a few years or months, you might be dead. And that was it. They weren't going to pay a lot. No one counted on people living as long as, or the number of people living as long as they do today. And that's the good of modern medicine, and that may be the bad of modern medicine from a financial standpoint, I guess. But it's something that affects all employers, not just public entities.
I think it should be noted, just knowing a lot of settlements, that incentive is typically finite for a certain amount of years.
Yeah.
It's usually 8 to 10 years in most districts.
Right.
It's not for life.
No.
Yeah. Because they understand that there is a cost.
Well, that's
Yeah,
typical.
yeah,
But
yeah,
there was
it's not for a
one-
30-year period.
There was one last year that a lot of times, a lot of people like to compare ourselves to, and which is, it's not a criticism of them, as Kevin said. It's an excellent district and all, but that's what they did for life. It's like, whoa. And
It's risky.
great now. Oh, look, we got a whole lot of retirements. What did it cost? Nothing. Well, it's going to cost for the next, 30 years. Nothing out of pocket now. So, that's what they did.
Yeah.
They thought that was right for them, and good for them.
Just the same way last year we gave an incentive and people took it. So, and with three of the bargaining units. So, everybody's different.
Does the district offer a health insurance buyback for declination of?
No, we used to, and that was eliminated. We do have a very small one, but it's only for employees that have the identical coverage, meaning they're part of the same health consortium. And I think there are 22 people in the district that get that, and it's $1,000 each, something like that. It's $1,000 each. I think there's
$1,000
22 of them. It's not a lot. So that was one thing that was eliminated over the years. And there's two schools of thought on that. The one is, well, you should give something, because now if somebody doesn't need the coverage, better they take that, whatever the incentive is, instead of getting the insurance, which now costs the district a lot of money. On the other hand, and I'm not saying which way's right, which way's wrong, it's just two schools of thought. On the other hand, with the cost of insurance going up so much, and the employee's contribution increasing more than it was 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, there's the incentive to not take the insurance if you don't need it. Because it used to be, the incentives came out, again, 30 years ago, when it was like, okay, you have a two spouse, or somebody working here who doesn't need the insurance because they have coverage, but it's not costing them anything anyway, so sure, I'll take it. So then it was, well, we'll give you an incentive to not take it since you don't need it. But now, with, again, to take teachers and administrators, they have to pay 18% of the cost for the insurance. That's a lot of money it's going to cost them for something they might not need. So, again,
Well, I'm
two
just
schools of
thinking
thought, not one right, one wrong.
But the
just
employee might have to pay 18% and their spouse might be paying 10%.
Could be,
So
right?
could be a cost savings if you gave a declination, or you offered a declination, people might think differently about it. Because the declination amount, the buyback amount might offset the cost in a premium, thereby they'd want the other one as opposed to the school district.
Yep,
Second question, what is the bigger unit, the employee's retirement or the teacher's retirement?
teachers.
Why is the employee's retirement going up 7% and the teacher's only 2%?
Well, the rate increases. I mean, the
Just seems a little
Yeah,
stark.
they
between
set
two.
the rates.
Okay.
And it's percentage, right. So it's in our budget, you can see, we'll use current years. Teachers' retirement system, just under $9 million, employees' retirement system, 3.9. So even though the increase on one is more than the other, and percentage-wise even much larger, in actual dollars, it's much less for the employees' retirement system than teachers. And you can see in the rates too, on employees' retirement system, the rates are higher than the teacher's retirement system. What they call the employer contribution rate, the percentage of salary that we pay him.
Two different funds, though, right?
Well, yeah, teacher's retirement system is its own, New York State Teacher's Retirement System is its own entity, and it has a board that governs it, sets the rates, does all of that. New York State Employees Retirement System is a New York State governmental run plan, and has a sole trustee, and it's the state comptroller. And that's not just schools, that's villages, towns, state employees, county employees. That's all part of New York State Employees Retirement System. Not police and fire, they have a separate retirement system. Any other question about benefits?
Yeah, what are the rates for an individual versus a family?
Oh, for health insurance?
Yes,
The
premiums.
Oh, I do have them. Hold on a second. So right now, hold on. Okay, right now, individual coverage is full coverage. This is 100% of the premium. This is, of this premium, employee pays part of it, district pays part of it. For individual, it's $1,307 per month. And family is $2,754 per month.
Yeah, I wish I could get it for that.
So there we go, it's a bargain. Mr. and Sarah said, the district is doing a fabulous job
I want to know how we can do.
in cost savings.
How we can get people into that plan.
Boy, talk about fiscal responsibility. Okay. Quote, Mr. and Sarah. It's multiplied by 12 months, right? That's monthly premium. Any other benefit questions? Okay, bond referendum. So we had talked a little bit about at previous meetings. We have had the bond committee working for over a year now. We toured all the buildings, showed them. It's a similar kind of makeup of the committee as this. Showed here's what our buildings need. You know, all our buildings are old. In one case, over 70 years old. Our youngest building is over 50 years old now. They're big buildings. They're getting old. They're expensive to maintain. And when we go out when we do construction work, we can't, like at home, you need to get a roof on your house, right? You call this roofing company, they come over, they say, okay, we'll do the roof for $15,000. You call another one, they say, we'll do it for $14,000. Yeah, you really like the first company better. So you say, you know what? Yeah, you said $15,000, but I called this company and they said they could do it for $14,000. Can you match that price? Yeah, sure, we'll match that price. But, you negotiate back and forth. We can't do that. If I try to do that, I go to jail. So,
And it doesn't look good in our end.
no offense, I'm not going to jail to try to get a lower, so we can't do that. We have to put it out to bid, right? So the bids come in, and it's a sealed bid, so we'll say bid opening for such and such construction project is on this date at 11 o'clock at North Country Administration Building. So that day and time, and any of the contractors that submitted bids, they're welcome to come in and witness the opening. We open up the bids, we read them, and we go with it's the lowest responsible bidder, right? So if we're putting up a 30,000 square foot addition onto one of our buildings, that's going to cost $30 million, and we have somebody drives up and says, well, I'm a handyman, but I'll submit a bid. Well, they can't do that works, right? So they would not be a responsible bidder. There's a whole list of requirements they have to meet to be considered a responsible bidder. But once we get down to it, if there's no reason to disallow a bid, and sometimes we want to, but not always, we go with the lowest bidder. Now, sometimes it's because The contractor may not have a good reputation. We may not like that we had to give him a bid, but we have had plenty of times companies that are just very difficult to work with, but they do the job well. So ultimately, when the work is done, they did a good job, and if it's a good price, well, so be it. It's just something we have to deal with. But we can't negotiate with the company. We can't play one company off another. And on the one hand, that sounds like, well, that doesn't make any sense. But on the other hand, if you look at it this way, if you said, if we put out a bid for, we're going to do the roof on this building, right? Nick, you put in a bid, $1 million, and you're the low bidder, right? You walk out of the bid opening, and think, okay, I got the job. Well, then Deirdre says, hey, I have a roofing company. What was the low bid, $1 million? I'll do it for $990,000. If I said, if I said, sure, here you go, here's a contract, you'd be like, what? Wait a second, that's no fair, and you'd be right. So now, if this were a business, sure, you could do that kind of stuff, but we can't. So we have to go with that. Also, all workers on what's called public works contract, any of our construction projects, everybody working on that has to be paid union wage. There's no called prevailing wage. They do not have to be union members, but they have to be paid union wages. So it drives up the cost. So it just does. It's very expensive. So anyway, so we went over all this stuff with the bond committee. We've been working with them. They unanimously recommended, there was a whole list of projects coming out to about $125 million to recommend to the board to go out for a bond referendum to do those projects. If we had a Board of Education meeting last week, if the board voted on it that night, the earliest we could have had the bond referendum, because of this timing of legal notices and all that, would have been March 11th. And we were talking about it earlier in the day of the board meeting, and we thought, timing-wise, that's not going to be good. The governor's budget proposal, which we'll talk about in a minute, had just come out the day before. It wasn't great news on that. We know the health insurance. Instead of trying to squeeze in a $125 million bond referendum while we're working on the budget, the one might hurt the other, and then they might hurt both each other. And so we thought March is not a great time to have a bond referendum anyway. It's kind of like in the middle of nowhere in the year. There's still people who are away, who spend, Mr. Russell, who's on our committee, who's in Florida, are away still. So we thought maybe in the fall would be better. And from a construction standpoint, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. The timing of how long it takes to draw up all the plans and specifications for these projects, which cannot be done ahead of time, by the way, that can only be commenced once there is voter approval. The timing to do all of that, submit it to the State Education Department, get the approvals back. The work would be done in years 2027, 2028 anyway. So if waiting a few months to do the bond referendum, this way gives us more time to put everything together to inform as many people in the community as possible, all the details about the bond and the referendum and what it entails. So anyway, so the board agreed with that and decided to table that for now. We'll revisit that and probably have the bond referendum in the fall. Yes, sir. Oh, well, it can be. So every year within the budget, so we have a capital projects line in the budget. And that's for not minor maintenance projects, larger projects. But $125 million worth of work cannot be funded all in one year. I mean, that would be impossible. So the alternative would be, well, what if we put in $6 million for 20 years?
No, he's meaning voting at the same time.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant the dollar amount of the project. Oh, well, that is a possibility. I mean, it certainly can be done that way. And there would be some people who would say, absolutely, it should be done that way. I mean, the way I look at it is they're independent of each other. And so just me personally, I would not like I'm voting on the budget and I'm voting on a $125 million bond. No way, that's too much. So I would prefer them to be separate, so each one can get the attention it deserves. But that doesn't mean that's the right way. There's not a right and a wrong. So that's why there are districts, sometimes there will be a budget vote, a bond vote along with the budget. Most districts do not do it that way for that reason. Not to try to hide it. I mean, we have to send all the notices out. We're not trying to do it in a secret way where nobody knows we're having a bond referendum. But so each one is independent of the other, and we can focus all our information that we put out on that. So we just want to let you know what we're doing with the bond. So now we have the executive budget proposal. That's the governor's budget proposal, was released last Tuesday. We didn't expect to get wonderful news, and the governor did not let us down in that regard. I mean, it wasn't news like we got last year in the governor's budget proposal where it was minus $8 million. So it wasn't that. If you look at the governor's proposal, it looks like we're losing $1 million in state aid, but actually, it's a little more than that because they started a few years ago playing a little game with aid for universal pre-kindergarten. And that universal pre-kindergarten aid was never part of that state aid run that they put out. They only added it a few years ago, and there's only one reason to add it, and that's to make it appear that districts are getting more money than they really are. Or the state, actually, I should say it differently. The state is paying out more than they really are. Because not all districts get that full amount that is theoretically eligible for universal pre-kindergarten. We went over that our last meeting with Tanya Horowitz was here and showed how to get that full.
She wasn't, we went over the board meeting, what we did it here.
Oh, you did it here, right. Yeah, Tanya Horowitz was at the board meeting, did it. Okay. I get you and Tanya confused sometimes, you know. So anyway, so Kevin at our last board meeting went over the
I'm more
pre-K
complimented.
and showed how, well, yes, in theory, we could get $1.6 million in UPK aid. However, it would actually cost us more than what we're paying, what our current pre-kindergarten program is costing us now. So that's why we're not doing that at this time. But that rate, that $5,400 per student, hasn't changed in over 20 years. So if this was 20 years ago and we were talking about it, we'd probably say, wow, $5,400 per student, that works, that's great. Now, it really doesn't. So anyway, so what's included in that state aid run is the maximum amount that any district can get in UPK aid. But it looks like, oh, this is how much we're getting, but we're not really. So, and if you look at what they're saying we're getting in this year compared to what we could get next year, it's almost a $1.5 million increase. So, but that's not real. So where it says we're losing $1 million on that chart, it's really more like $2.5 million our aid is going down. Now, a big part of our reason, when you see the budget, when we finish everything, and you'll see state aid 1 year to the next decreasing by even more than that, but most of it, what our decrease will be next year, is in building aid being reduced. Not in any bad way, it's building aid on our 2007 bond is completing, and so that's ending. Now, that, even though it's a reduction on the state aid, that's part of our tax cap calculation. So when we, again, go back to the tax cap calculation, which I'll go over at one of our coming up meetings, that increases our tax cap. So you'll see our tax cap next year being somewhere around 3.6% because of the reduction in building aid. Yes, sir.
Right, but isn't the bonds they were getting the state aid from, the debt service is outside of the tax cap.
Yes, so in this case, so, so that bond, that 2007 bond, a portion of it had a 15-year life repayment, and a portion of it had a 20-year life. But all of the aid is over 15 years. So, and I don't mean this in a critical way, because again, there's not a right and a wrong. My preference, and like with the bond we're talking about now, having a referendum for, my recommendation is match, the aid is going to come in over 15 years. So make it a 15-year term on the bond. So when the aid runs out, well, we don't have the payments anymore either. That would be my preference. That bond was already put together. In January of 2007, there was a bond referendum here, about $77 million. It failed. So then there was, okay, well, let's trim it down somewhat, put it up for a revote. July of 07, I started working here. The revote was in October of 07. So when I said to the superintendent at the time, I said, I don't know, maybe we should do it all 15-year term. And he said, well, what would that mean with the payments? And, well, our annual payments would go up a little bit, but just like if you had a 30-year, 15-year mortgage instead of a 30-year mortgage. Payments are higher, but you're done much shorter time. So what it would have meant compared to that first bond vote in January, it would have meant even though the amount was lowered, the annual payments would go up, even though they'd be 5 years less. And the thought at the time was, well, we're not doing that. We're not going to go out now for a second bond vote saying we reduced it by $5 million, but guess what? You're going to pay more per year. So everyone will have to deal with that 15 years from now. Well, here we are. No, it's more than 15 years. It's actually 18 years. But by the time, even though it was a 2007 bond, October of 07, by the time all the plans are done, the construction starts, blah, 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 and the payment started, now it's at 15 years. So the aid is ending this year, but we have a few more years on the payments. But what that means is when the payments stop in a few years, there will be no corresponding decrease to the building aid. So go back to, there's not a right and a wrong. That's the way I would prefer it. The upside to the way it was done was, well, we spread the payments out over 20 years instead of 15, even though we got the aid over 15 years. So the 2014 bond that we did, it was a 15-year term on the bond, and then like all other aid is paid over 15 years. So what we'll see is a couple of years after that one ends, when that bond building aid runs out, the payments also stop.
So there are some districts, and just recently, one district put up a bond where they spread out the payments over 30 years.
30 years.
Which means they're going to have another 15 years where the families and the community members are going to keep paying, even though the aid ended 15 years before. That's an awfully long time, but that's what they put out to have as a proposal. So the bottom line with the governor's proposal, it's a 2% increase, which monetarily that amounts for us, after all the calculations, is $591,000. That's it.
That's the increase in the foundation aid.
That's all we're getting. So now, as we explained last year, this is first blush. So the Senate and the Assembly still have to give their crack at this. They have till April 1. We have not had one of those submitted by April 1st in almost 30 years. So don't count on holding our breath for April 1 that coming in. So the hope is that it will go up. But even if it was 3%, we're not talking a large amount of money. So it's not, again, like we said last year, the board, we were speaking to the board and all of you, if we wound up having an increase, and this body recommend those of you that are now on the 2-year term of this, that even if we got the increase, we would plan that increase would go toward reserves as opposed to being used for changing anything in the work. And thank God we didn't plan on anything going in there. There were a lot of districts that planned on that money coming in, and it never happened. We were flat, so were many other districts. So it didn't, when we were told we were just getting the same amount of aid, it didn't impact us. Other districts had a major impact. They now had to, at that point, cut back on their proposals. So we can hope that the money is going to come in. I don't believe it's going to be much of an increase. If we'll be lucky if it's 3%, maybe 4%, just to keep this in mind. And this is where people watching online, which I don't know how many people we got watching out there, or hopefully they're watching this recording. Wonderful. 4. Wait, I want to go on the phone.
Actually, I'm one of them.
Two. Wonderful.
They probably both work at my office.
The apathy is wonderful. So, maybe they're going to watch later on, like, I'll just catch the Netflix on this. The point of the matter is, the money, what we're looking at here, we should be angry, and we should be advocating heavily for our district. So, next Saturday, the members of the Legislative Committee and the Board of Education, and we were talking about potentially inviting members of certain units to come with us, as they did in the past, to the Longwood Legislative Breakfast. All the state representatives will be there, and some of our federal folks will be there too, to listen to the different districts. We have questions that we present. Most of the districts in our region attend, and that's our chance. And then in March, Dr. Dabrowski and myself are going upstate with the Superintendent's Association to try to advocate again there at that level. So we're trying to do our best. I know the unions, many of the unions, NYSET and other unions in the district go on advocacy days. We've got to all do a full court press on this in order to try to get more funds in some way, somehow. But like I said, it's an election year coming up for the governor. She's trying to make nice with people. So we're at least it was 2%. We're cutting you $8 million. Your guess is as good as mine as what part of the Rockefeller Commission recommendations they picked to come up with these formulas. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. One large district on the island, well, we're getting $591,000. They're getting over $500 million. So it's this now. The disparity is because we're high wealth. We can pay. So we got 2%. Rocky Point got 2%. Rocky Point and us are not in the same category either. So how we're on the same percentages beyond me. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to any of the calculations. If you go to Albany and you sit with the governor's psychometricians, they'll come up with a formula and tell you this is what they used. But from our eyes, it doesn't make any sense. So disappointing news again. Better than a cut, still not wonderful. So we need to still advocate on every level here. So that's my soapbox.
What department is responsible for managing and overseeing the capital projects?
Well, our facilities department, which is, I oversee. So it's our facilities
So if
department.
you can't hire the architect, the engineer, or do any work until the bond passes, how do you arrive at the 125 million number? Like, where do your estimates come from?
Well, from the architect. So our
operating
architect, he works with us, and this is, it's not just us. I mean, they would do any architect would do the same in any district. And working to put the parameters of a budget together, get costing estimates, that kind of thing. What I mean by he can't do work on it is, the architect can't draw up plans and specifications. That takes months and months to do. That work cannot be done until there's voter approval. But it's not like myself and Dr. Scanlon and Jason Grefsky, who's our facilities director, going around saying, well, let's see, if we replace a boiler here, I don't know, let's call that $800,000. No, we get the cost estimates from our architect, who, by the way, if I probably said it here before, but if not, we're very fortunate with our architect. He does, I think he's in 35 school districts. Actually, his father started the firm years and years ago, was actually the district architect for the Sewanaka High School District in Nassau County, and then started his own firm. And John Grillo, it was John A. Grillo, and then his son John Grillo, who's a district resident, runs the firm now. He's fantastic. He does so much work for us that he does not get paid for. And it's happened times over the years. There could be something happen in one of our buildings, 2 o'clock in the morning over a weekend, a pipe burst, and we need some help with that. he'll be there. Has nothing to do with any work he did or oversaw or had done. He's not getting paid a penny for it, but he'll be there to help us with it. Like I said, I think it's 35 districts he's in. So he knows exactly how, and then he has engineers that he works with. Exactly, they do the pricing estimates the same way a contractor would. So it's not like he's just making up some number. So that he can do for us. So if we were to not have a bond at all, if the board decides, nah, we don't want to do that, or if the bond fails, he doesn't get anything out of it. And that's just, that's okay. He can't, the way it used to be, way back 25 or so years ago, whether it be a bond referendum or even by the way, the same works with the budget vote and capital projects in the budget. So, but the way it used to be was the architect would draw up all the plans and specs, submit everything to the state education department, get the approval back, go out to bid, and then if the budget vote passed, or if it was a bond, the bond passes, next day, call that contractor and say, okay, start work. It used to be that way. The problem is if the budget doesn't pass, or the bond referendum doesn't pass, then the architect did all of that work, and then the architect says, hey, I gotta get paid for this. But there's no voter approval on those projects. So that's why that changed.
Does the architect's work also need to be bid out? Is it a large
No,
enough
it's a
amount?
professional service. So we can do a request for proposals, which was done way back. Actually, that was before I was here, because there were some issues with previous architects. But that's a professional service, similar to like our attorney. It does not have to be bid out. Right.
All right, and another question, like, did any of the other aid lines increase or decrease? I know there's others, I know there's transportation.
Yeah.
What other lines are
So
there?
they kind of, the $591,000 increase in foundation aid was pretty much wiped out by some decreases in some of those other areas. But just to remind everyone, so that's the governor's budget proposal, right? So almost always, maybe even always, that's the bottom line. Now, it hopefully, and like it normally does, goes up from there by the time the state legislature is done with it. How much? We don't know. But even then, even when the state budget is done, everything's done, they say, okay, here's how much aid you're getting next year. It's still an estimate, because it's all based on when we do our financial reports at the end of the year, we submit them, because some of them are expense-based, and they're based on how much we spend in certain areas, and that kind of thing. So it's still an estimate, but some of those lines in the in the estimate for next year in the budget, governor's budget proposal, did decrease.
So
A little
the angry piece again that we should think about is, while we are capped at, the tax cap for us, the state and reserves, what reserves are is 4% for most part, in most areas. The state is sitting on 15% of the state budget in reserves right now. That's a lot of money. So that means 15% of the taxes we're paying the state are sitting in a reserve account in the state of New York. Now, why we have to be at the 4% mark and they have to be they're at 15% is beyond me, and no one seems to question that at all. That's a major concern on our part. So, yes, when you look at your property tax bill, schools are the largest component of that. There's a lot of factors for that. As we said before, the system in New York State is archaic in many ways. There are probably better systems out there. The state hasn't considered any of those. But we're one of the few states that it's predominantly on property taxes that they calculate the school, that we are paying for school taxes on that. That's not the case in many, many other states. So it's a major concern for us as we move forward, especially as the population in New York, we continue to have people moving out of the state, and other states are surpassing us. California, Texas, and Florida are now 1, 2, and 3. We're 4. Probably the next census we're going to drop to 5 or 6, the way things are heading at this point in time. So it's a massive move. Michael can talk about that, how many people are moving out of state, And it's a major concern for us as well. So the balancing of those costs overall. And what you're seeing in some of those other states is that now their taxes are increasing exponentially because when you have people retire to certain areas, well, that's great. Then you need to build hospitals and you need to build, for those people that work in it, you need to build neighborhoods and you need to build schools if they start having families. So then all of a sudden the taxes start going up again. But they have different rates than we do and how they do that. So just a matter of concern that the community should consider on all this, going with that advocacy piece. Why that's not questioned more, why that's not publicized more in the media is beyond us. But that definitely should be. We sneeze crooked and we have News 12 sitting on the front lawn of one of the buildings. This doesn't get any news whatsoever. So it's very bizarre. So, and it's a major, major thing that people, if you're complaining about your taxes, that's a major piece of your taxes. So why isn't anybody saying anything about that on Long Island or the lower state area? And we just seem to like it falls on deaf ears. So hopefully the 2 people watching online, and maybe the millions that will watch later, we put this out there. So,
I have a question if I can.
sure, Rich.
I assume you can hear me. So, with the bond, I was just curious, I don't know if this is in play with the architect. I would assume it would be. But things considering like longevity, considering climate, like I look at Setauket, it is the water level, the aquifer area, the water table, excuse me, is very high there. It's just going to get higher. Was that part of the decision-making in, maybe the board knows? Because I'm concerned because I'm thinking like, all right, I'm not going to be here, but in 50 years, it's good. Long Island's going to look very different, mostly on the South Shore, but also you talk right around Setauket, anywhere where there's water. I know our AC units, I don't know what their lifespan is, but they're going to be tested. Storm damage is most likely going to increase. Can the buildings even withstand that? So does the bond address those things, or is the materials for designing and reconstructing the buildings, is that taken into consideration? Specifically, there are certain things, like we just had the fires in LA, some of the houses are still standing because they followed certain standards.
Correct.
That aren't really ahead of their time. They've been around a long time, but some people actually use them, and their houses are still there.
Right.
Oddly enough, when the whole neighborhood is gone. Setauket, I'm just thinking Setauket because that's my home school, but other schools, Nassau floods a lot. I mean, even if, you can do a lot of things, but places that flood are probably just going to keep flooding and more. Did the bond consider that, or I should say to the architect, was that in one of the considerations we asked the architect to?
So I can answer. So, yes. So the short answer is yes. So for instance, let's talk about the flooding piece. So Nassau is flooded 3 times in the past, I think, 12 years. So but that doesn't mean other schools didn't flood as well. So the storm before this last one, we lost the gyms in 2 of the junior high schools and a couple of the other elementary schools as well. So it's every building in this district is affected. So to your point, when you're looking at the climate surveys, where water is going to be 20 years from now, we should all start bailing now and learn to swim, based on everything's melting out there. But the less facetious, like take the cupolas for a second. The cupolas, when they were built in the buildings, were built out of wood. They capped them with copper on the top, which they felt, that'll last forever. Statue of Liberty's made out of copper, it lasted 100 years. There was huge holes in it when they redid it back in 1986. Doesn't last forever. The copper sheathing on top of those buildings, they probably didn't account for the hurricanes that were going to come in, the amount of hurricanes and the amount of weather changes. So take, for instance, Murphy Junior High School, most of the copper sheathing on their cupola is gone. We flew a drone up above it. Dean Costas took pictures. It's mostly gone. Setauket's cupola, the beams that are supporting the cupola standing up there, the wood around them is gone. So it's not even just the copper sheathing, it's also the wood has now disappeared. So there are obviously better materials today that would last longer. Things like, I don't want to promote any companies like AZAC and things like that are out there, but those still have a lifespan too. AZAC is not meant to be up there for 50 years. It has a lifespan too, just like a roof would have a lifespan, and, you know, even the brickwork, while all these buildings are built beautifully with all these wonderful bricks, brickwork is supposed to be maintained. It's supposed to be treated, it's supposed to be waterproofed, you have to watch for the weep holes and the drainage in the bricks themselves. Those get clogged, and when they clog up, guess where the water goes? Back into the buildings. So all that was accounted for in those type of things. So to be specific about Setauket, you know, being in the water table area, that's something that we have to take a look at and see where is that going. Right now, the major focus for water would be more because of where Nassaking is. It sits in a hollow, as opposed to there's actually a pond next door in the Hawkins house that is literally above the roof line of the school. So when they built that, it was a rather bizarre way. Like, you built the school below the water above it. You know, it's going to drain down towards the school at some point in time. So major considerations when we were talking about the parking lots and the drainage systems that they're in there. Now, for instance, our storm drains take up can take a 3-inch rain. The storm on August 19th, it was 11 inches of rain in how long a period?
Oh, yeah, we got, actually, our weather station here, 10.24 inches of rain. In a 24-hour period.
So no drainage system that we have anywhere in the district is built to withstand that. So when they said it was a once in a century storm, well, we've had 3 of them, and so that's got to go. It's like, okay, once every 3 years storm, and type of thing should be considered. So there are major pieces like that, and that's where we have to talk about things not just of drainage, but also diverting water away from the buildings. You know, where would it go? And we have to think about that as well. So a lot of that was considered in the bond. So when we looked at Nassaking in particular, and a few people here were on the committee, we talked about, do we build some type of drainage system with like rock walls coming down so it diverts, so it doesn't all just like Niagara Falls pour towards the building and aim at one area. The loading dock area in particular is very, very low, and the building actually goes into the basement. Talked about just filling that in, because that was where all the water went in, and it was really the sub-basement. It got all the way down to the sub-basement in that building, which is what contributed to the major problems that we had. Now, all the work we've done in there, Nassaking's in the best shape of any building in the district right now, because it's all brand-new equipment, so it's in much better shape that way. But we're still contending with air quality issues in that building. Jack Blaum goes around testing the air with Jason Grefsky, and there are concerns of different pieces in that area. We've always had in certain rooms a smell. We came to find out that when they built the school, they cut down the trees and buried them underneath the building and put the building over the top. Yes. Very, very common. In this area, a lot of the homes that were built in this area, if you look at old maps dating back to the 1920s, they built whole communities over streams. So when people have, I have flooding, there's a reason why this S section doesn't have basements in some of the areas, because guess what around down there? There's a bunch of streams and ponds. They just drained them out and slapped up houses as fast as they could. I have a family member that lives in that area that has a basement, and it floods. So, that's just because of where it sits. And they're on a high ground. This building, for instance, North Country, we're on a high ground. We rarely, if ever, get a flood in this place. Knock on wood. Now we'll get, everything will come down. So, but, it has to be a major consideration. Do we, even when we put the air conditioning units, we got complaints from people in the historical societies because it was unsightly, so we had to reposition them over at Setauket. You probably remember some of those conversations.
They didn't like that one of the soldiers was holding the AC unit.
Yeah.
Those units, they have obviously they have a lifespan.
Correct.
So I think, I don't know what we're in here, but I would tell my students.
Well, that was 2014.
Yeah, well, Setooket's were a little, so Setauket had gotten new univents a few years prior to that bond, so they were retrofitted. So the univents themselves at Setauket are a few years older. It was 2014 bond. It was, let me think, in 2016, I think it was Arrowhead, Wood Melville, and the 2 junior highs. I think the other elementaries were 2018, I think they were put in.
So a little newer.
So,
But even those units have a lifespan too. that's one of the things, you put them in, there's a replacement cost in that. Eventually, they're going to go, and now there is it's passed the state Senate and the legislature. They have approved the indoor air temperature now at 88 degrees. So we are way ahead of the game. There are school districts in the state panicking right now because if the indoor air temperature in a room hits 88 degrees, you have to evacuate the room and put the students somewhere else. Maybe not such a problem this week, but come May and June and September and sometimes even into October, we get some really high temperatures. That's going to be a problem. So, and the second part, the bond actually was going to be split into two pieces, which in October we're going to plan to do that again. The second part of the bond was air conditioning for the cafeterias and the gymnasiums at the elementary schools and the gymnasiums at the junior high schools for next year. Because we, especially at the junior high schools, we use those for testing areas in June for the schools. So if they hit 88 degrees, we got to figure out where we're putting all those students inside classrooms in the building. So that's a disruption to the testing environment as well. Trying to track all that. Stacy's cringing because if the high school had to do that, it'd be huge. She's in charge of that. So there's a major considerations for a lot of those things. So that we split off along with the turfing of the high school football field as a separate piece. All the other safety stuff is in Proposition 1. So things like this, drainage, the pipes, windows in this building, things that were never not done in the past. So.
Thank you. But just like you said, windows, like the windows that we need in the near future are not the windows people are buying right now.
Correct.
Right? So that really is a consideration because we can really save a lot more money in the future.
Right.
When we're not here, but still.
And just so we're clear, that doesn't, even if we pass a bond, that does not mean the capital budget each year goes down. We would still want to keep slowly increasing that amount of money, so that, at one point we were up over $6 million in that, and I think this year we're at $3 million. So we're probably going to bring that down a little bit, considering these numbers you saw tonight, so that next year it has to go down a little bit, so we don't have, we have to have some money in there, but not maybe the $3 million. But we're going to have to keep looking at that to put that back in and do some of this type work. Well, we may have to replace 10 AC units at a school one day, or we might have to replace a roof in another building one day without having to go out to a bid. There is a district on Long Island that we are also compared to that sits in their capital budget. We're not talking about a bond that passed. Their capital budget is $44 million. So they have many buildings. They have 2 high schools. They have a lot. So they have built that reserve up. Now, some people say, well, that's a lot of money. But in case in point, like you're saying, if something major came along, they don't have to go out to a bond to take care of that stuff. They can have it done immediately.
What about the portables in all the buildings? They were supposed to be gone, I think.
25 years ago,
Yeah,
yes.
when my kids were in school.
So that was also a piece of this. So right now, what we're looking at, and this is one of the considerations we're looking at the schools, and I mentioned this the last time, the intent is that we try to get the SAC programs back into the buildings. They were at one point years ago. That's our intent. Right now, the only one that's in so far is Mounts. So we moved that in last year. Next year, we're looking at Arrowhead, Setauket, and Nassau possibly being moved in. However, one of the major considerations this committee can recommend is we can certainly hold off at one of those buildings to try to rent some of the indoor space to somebody else. For instance, last year, we brought in BOCES and asked them to look at Nassau. What they offered us was about $60,000 for 5 rooms. Doesn't help us a lot. But now with this budget the way it is, maybe we actually just went back to them. I had a conversation with the CEO for BOCES and said, could you come back and talk to us again and perhaps increase that? And he said, certainly, maybe because they're desperate for space. BOCES is dying for space. They're looking all across the island for any space they can find. They don't have enough space for their programs. So maybe they'll come back with a higher amount of money. Maybe if it was $75,000, maybe the board will reconsider that at that point in time. But I think right now, the way our budget is sitting, major consideration right now as we're going into the process from the administrative end, we're looking at all non-staffing pieces first to see where we can cut back as much as possible. Because I'd rather cut back on certain things and keep our class sizes reasonable and, our staffing reasonable. But we're eventually going to have to touch staffing too. It's an inevitability with these numbers. But before we do that, we're going to look at all those other areas where we can make considerable cuts. And if we can bring in revenue somehow, some way, like a BOCES program coming in, that has to be a consideration. I have lunch this Friday with the headmaster from the Stony Brook School to talk about here. As in, if they are interested in moving a program here. Last year, they were very much interested in opening up a middle school program. This wasn't a middle school, it was an elementary school, but if it suffices for their needs. However, there are some major things that's not going to be without cost to us if we do that move. We have the knock here. It would be several $100,000, if not $1 million, to move that program up or out. Maybe we keep it here and work out a deal. Who knows? I don't know what their overall needs are, but I'll find out more on Friday. So, he's buying lunch, by the way. I bought it last time. It's now his turn.
Does the knock have external access?
External meaning?
Like building egress access?
No, it's on the old stage in the gymatorium that's
Okay.
here in the middle of the building.
The reason for my question is, theoretically, you could rent out the rest of the building but retain access to the knock.
Correct.
And
Yes.
You keep ownership of the building. Moving those is non-trivial, it's expensive. It
Correct.
typically brings I haven't seen a knock move that's actually operationally brought benefit to somebody, unless you were getting rid of the land with it.
Right.
So,
So this building, just so we're clear, years ago, and several people in this room were here when that happened, the front part of the building here was rented to BOCES, and the back was administration. And that was 2009. It was decided because administration was scattered all over the district. You had to go, if you were trying to register for your child in this district, you were going to 3 different locations to try to do that. The registrar was in one building, the transportation office was in another building. We had facilities over at Setauket. You remember, Rich, how that looked. Yeah, so it was like, ugh. So that's where the fields are now. But you're right, Linda, those portables have outlived their usefulness in many ways. And it's only by the good graces of the people that work for us that they've kept them going for a long time. And I'm not even going to look at Lori because she can tell me horror stories about what those things look like. And Lori remembers when they were probably here because she was in school at the time. And so it was 30 years ago at this point. So, they were never intended to be a permanent fixture. It was a short-term solution. So, yes. Yeah, just.
If SAC doesn't move in because you can rent the space, what is the outlook for SAC because the buildings are falling apart?
The intent is to hopefully curate space for both. And Mount, we could do that. In particular, Nassaquig is getting there. Mount right now is our smallest elementary school in the district, and with moving the 6th grade out, and even keeping the pre-K program, even if we had a full-day pre-K program, we'd still have space in both of those buildings to use.
Did you all, sorry, go ahead.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Well, first of all, I just wanted to thank you and the board and the administration for actually considering a deep study of the buildings. I know we'd been talking about this in this committee for a bit, so thank you for taking up that study. I think the last board meeting, you started discussing it. I think it'll be beneficial to have that all documented, and then be able to figure out what the best use is for each of the properties. You mentioned something in a passing comment before about class sizes. Does again, this is a live wire issue, I understand, but does the physical plant support larger class sizes after we sort of stop the distancing stuff from COVID, et cetera?
It does. We're in discussions with the teachers union. There's a lot of studies out there that talk about ideal class sizes. When you're looking at an elementary level, you certainly want the primary levels probably smaller than the intermediate levels. We are below the average class sizes that are within the contract right now, and in some cases that's admirable and it's desirable. However, as the population has shrunk, and by concentrating some of our programs in certain buildings, it has led to disparities in the percentages of students with needs versus students, general education students, as we would say. So you try to keep it normally 1/3 to 2/3 third of students with special needs. And that could be special education, 504s, E&L, but you have to be just kind of conscious of that. And we're in the midst of having studies done. In fact, there's another one coming up on E&L about whether or not we should split the program out from Mount and split it up into a couple of buildings. Probably couldn't happen for next year at this juncture, but in the very near future, it could, depending on where our numbers lie. As of today, and Erin isn't here for this meeting, but I will tell you, Minnesota has now surpassed Setauket as a special education program. It used to be Setauket and Arrowhead with the two clustered special education buildings. Minnesota now has more special education than Setauket does. So it's just the way the numbers are falling. And one of the things by separating the programs, it was combined to try to save money and cluster them when we were much larger, and it did at those times. Now, as we're getting smaller and we're seeing these ratios becoming an issue in classes, we have to be conscious of that. And at the same time, the cost of transportation has increased exponentially. So, think about a student at Mount, if you're an E&L, being bused from Arrowhead. You're probably on a bus for a half hour, 45 minutes, crossing just the town just to get to the school. And there's a point of what would solve that is probably having the program closer, if not in the building. So Arrowhead right now has 30 students out of the 108 E&L students. So the only trouble is Arrowhead only has one available classroom right now. First time since Marissa Redden's been principal there, she said that they have an empty room for the first time this year. They haven't had an empty room here. Last year, there wasn't a space to be had. We were even using the portables at one point to do some of the specialized programs outside of the building because there just wasn't enough space. Now it's gone the opposite direction. Now with moving the sixth grade out, it'll free up some available space for considerations of SAC and potentially a full-day pre-K program, which, by the way, as you saw from that recommendation, is what we're trying to aim toward, because we then could capitalize on more of that funding. And just remember, it's not going to cover the program fully, but it's eventually our goal to have a full-day pre-K program in place, similar to how we have a full-day kindergarten program in place. So that's, I think, our educational goals as moving forward. However, one of my favorite movies, I said this the other day, is the movie Hoosiers. Anyone ever see the movie Hoosiers? Okay, Indiana basketball. I'm a basketball fan. There's a line in there that I can't repeat verbatim because it has some offensive language, but it goes sort of something like this. The sun doesn't shine on the same dog's tail twice in one day, but you haven't seen a ray of light since you got to this town. I feel like that every single year I've been superintendent. First year we had to cut 30 staff members. Last year we had the governor cutting us $8 million. This year now it's healthcare benefits. Like, when are we going to get out from under? It's like every time we plan for something, something else comes along. So we've got to try to start to minimize some of those outside influences on us and start to figure out our own internal issues and solving some of that. So, yes, I agree. The committee that the board formed to look at the properties, let's talk about whether we sell off something. Let's talk about whether we lease off something. Let's talk about those things openly, and that the whole community can understand what that looks like. It's not going to be popular, but it's something we have to do. So, I did say that if, as Carmen said last meeting, if they open up a McDonald's right here at North Country, I will be the first one on the line. So maybe I'll set up a pneumatic tube to my office and I don't have to even go down there. But we have to start thinking outside the box with some of these things as we move forward.
Because one of the things is, like we had discussed earlier about, there are classes that perhaps students get blocked out of, right? And on the other side, we're always looking at class sizes and class loads to see, whether teachers, you're talking about, excising teachers. Well, that's not a desirable state either.
Right.
So is there room, if the plant can take it, does it make sense to perhaps increase the class sizes in certain classes to allow for plant and teachers to be freed up to offer those extra courses, so where, the students are getting serviced more, as well as, we're retaining and not letting good talent go, so.
So part of that would be to when we look at this committee, you can see the class size report that was given to the board in December. That's just the fall class size report. One of the major things that we have to look at, and we've already started doing this with the guidance department, and there was a letter out to all the parents in the community going secondary. We can't have courses with single-digit numbers in them at any of our secondary buildings. And those are core classes. We have that in certain areas like special education, resource rooms are capped by regulation, but it's these other courses. And what's contributing to that is when we send out the schedules in August, we get this onslaught of people that want to change their schedule. And it disrupts everything. Because I could tell you in July, when we sit down to do that, our administration, those classes are pretty much perfectly balanced. And then August hits and everyone goes out, and, we actually have students that actually take our entire schedule and have it on Facebook before we even had the whole schedule out. And they're already starting to go back and forth, well, if I switch this and switch that, then I'm going to be in this class with my friend. And I'm going to be there. And I'm going to have first period free. I'm going to have ninth period. So this year, everyone's forewarned at this point in time, you have until June. If you don't make any changes at that point, the only things that reason why we'll change the schedule after that is you failed a class and you didn't make up that course over the summer with our credit recovery program, or we made a mistake, which I think will be on a minimum of things, or as we have traditionally done, if you've had that teacher or family member has had that teacher, we wouldn't put you in there unless you said, yeah, I can have that teacher again, type of thing. Those are the things we would only accept. After June, no more. If you fail, if you're in the course, like an AP course, and you want to drop down, different story. But we can't start out with the imbalances that happen. And it's killing us at this point, to the point where we had 1,600 schedule changes for 1,425 kids. That's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. We've come to the point of, and by us allowing it, is creating a massive staffing issue and a massive space issue for us. And it's not appropriate anymore. So it's got to just stop. So now it's going to stop. And I'm holding to our word that we are going to stop it. And if parents get angry about it, if students get angry, they have to understand is that we can't be sitting here with you saying, we're doing everything we can. We're not if we're letting that happen. We've got to stop it at the gates at that. And it's a huge issue for us because it leads to these imbalances with teachers. You'll have a teacher, they've got 12 kids in one class and 29 in another. That's crazy. That's just crazy. Because somebody figured out that if I go there and say, I don't like this or I don't like that, and then I can switch that class, or we've just got to put an end to that. And it's a 9-period day at the high school. So another consideration is we can offer courses all 9 periods. We've been catering to, the seniors don't have to come in for first period. Stop it. That's when the course is offered. That's when you're going to have to come to school. I'm sorry. Or don't take the class. That's your choice. And we offer a lot of courses. I've worked in 6 different districts in 2 different states. We pride ourselves in so much of the things we offer. We offer the highest number of AP courses in our region. We are pride of a lot of programs. Our business teachers are dying. Every one of their classes is maxed at this point in time. They're taking more than they probably should. And that's why one of the budget considerations with staffing is even if we might have to cut some in some area, we need to add another business teacher. There's a desire for it, there's a need for it. It's just like, we want to get the languages into the 6th grade. We have to commit to some of these things and make sure to put our 6th grade students on par with their 6th grade counterparts in 75% of the state and the country. They've been woefully behind. And if we want to continue to have this high praise of this district, then as Rich said, if we're planning for a future with buildings, we got to plan for a future for our students and what we can offer them. And to stick our head in the sand and think about what things were like 40 years ago and why, when it was built this way, that's why we have to keep doing, is ridiculous. The worst part of an organization to say is, we've always done it this way, is the worst. We might as well just walk into the fires together on that one. So that's just ridiculous that we would use that as an argument for anything out there. So that's my soapbox. I'm sorry I'm off of it.
Was there anything else? Any other questions about anything at all before we leave and let you all deliberate for a bit?
Speaking of business classes, one of the BAC meetings is scheduled on the same night as the Industry Advisory Board's career fair.
Oh, we can switch that.
Which one is that?
It's on the 11th.
February 11th?
February 11th.
We'll switch it, because I want to be there too.
Tuesday.
I have to verse Mike in taking out the lugs off the car.
Okay, well, if that's it.
I'm going to send a message. Jackie, can you remember, we have to reschedule it tomorrow.
She's watching.
She's watching.
Thank you. All right, thank you, everybody. We're going to depart as long as you're comfortable.
And if there's anything in particular.